Color Chapter community. Good morning. It's Reverend Tegus One here with our episodes for Advent, Men of Color in Advent. We will be doing a concluding part of the series today, and it will be broken down into about three segments. So stay tuned. Our first segment will be titled Men of Color, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And this is taken from the book of Matthew, chapter 1, which deals with Jesus's genealogy. Last week, we talked about the fact that although Jesus's entire genealogy consists of men of color, typically the Christian community does not focus on that. And we use the Isaiah passage that focuses so much. That's what people pick out of the Old Testament when we're celebrating Christmas in this powerful love of God manifested through the birth of his son, the incarnation. We use that Isaiah passage without even recognizing who Isaiah is and without recognizing that God came through a community of people of color and spoke to the entire world through a people of color. So in order to go into that, I mean, you would have to read the entire scriptures, the Old Testament. You will have to dig out the maps, but it's worth doing because as you trace those places from which this biblical story that the world's salvation hinges on comes from, I think something is going to happen in our imagination and our attitudes towards people of color. Because, of course, as we know, there is the assumption that people of color are excluded from this narrative, the Christian narrative, that we are strangers to it and we're ignorant of it. And scripture tells us otherwise. We were situated right in the middle of that story, that narrative. So today we're going to be focusing on the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the men of color in Advent, the good, the bad, the ugly. If you're a person who reads the Bible, I know you struggled with those passages that talk about the genealogy, and so begat this, and that begat that, and this begat that. But there is a purpose in that, especially when you come to the New Testament and you start to look into the genealogy of Jesus. One of the things that is clear is that not only were these men of color, who were Jesus's progenitors, however, they were not perfect people. You had good people in them, you had bad people in them, you had righteous people in them, unrighteous people, crooked people, straightforward people, you had adulterers, you had all kinds of people. And the reason that I am bringing that out today is the notion that people's the activity of certain people in a people group excludes them from that story. That's what has happened with us as a woman of color in America. The focus on people of color tends to be about the negative things they did, as though only people of color did negative things, and so those negative things should exclude them from participating as joint heirs in this wonderful narrative of salvation and redemption that God has called. This genealogy of Jesus is also pointing out to us that God does not choose a people group because of their righteousness. For example, we look at Abraham, the original person to have this call outside of Adam and Eve, and we see the ways he failed miserably. This man, he pimped out his wife several times. His sons pimped out their wives several times, and yet God continued to choose them. Jacob was a person who betrayed the sibling code by deceiving his brother, stealing the place of heir. God loved him and still chose him, not because he was right, but because God has a call on our lives. And the point I want to bring out with this issue of the good, the bad, the ugly, which we can go to Matthew chapter 1 to look at, is we really need to stop picking on the negatives among men of color and using that to exclude them from being heir to respect, being heir to dignity, being heir to good employment, being heir. We need to just cut that out, because all the good things in the world God has given to everybody not because we are perfect, and haven't even worked with the people of color, chosen his family from the people of color. God makes it abundantly clear that we're not worse than the rest of the world. We are actually a representative, a microcosm of the world. And this is who the world is. And this is the world that God has loved. So why isn't the world loving us, whom God has loved? So I want to leave you with that. As you ponder that, we're going to go to our second segment. I'm going to log out of this segment because I really want people to focus, take each segment separately, go back, read that scripture, Matthew chapter 1, read that genealogy, go back in the Old Testament and see who those people were and see that they were still important in the narrative of Jesus. God did not toss them out. And I want that to impact our theology of the incarnation, our theology of the gospel, our theology of the salvation, and also impact our missionary approach. So thanks for listening to this first part. Hey, we're going to switch over to the second part. Join us in a minute. Thank you.